6 months before I launched the podcast, my mom lost her battle to opioids. And what ended up happening was the conversations I ended up having were more about how do you overcome adversity? How do you come back from a rock bottom moment? How do you love yourself? And I think because in that moment, I needed that conversation and the authenticity of those conversations in that moment, that's why the podcast took off.
It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
Welcome to The Journey with Mark Astor. I'm your host, Mark Astor. I've spent a lot of years sitting across the table from people during some of the most challenging moments of their lives. As an attorney, an advocate, and as someone who understands that the road isn't always straight. What I've learned is that success, recovery, and growth rarely look the way we expect them to. There are detours, hard conversations, and moments that change everything. On this podcast, I talk with people who are willing to be honest about their journey, what worked, what didn't, and what they wish they knew sooner. My guest today is Justin Schenck. He's host of the Growth Now Movement, a podcast he launched in 2016 that has grown to more than 600 episodes featuring conversations about success, resilience, personal growth, and overcoming adversity. But what makes Justin's story so powerful isn't simply what he's accomplished, it's where he started. Justin has described himself as the kid who was least likely to succeed. He had a 1.7 GPA. His father went to jail, and his mother struggled with opioid addiction for roughly 20 years before ultimately losing her life to the disease. I'm sorry about that, Justin. Justin could have allowed these circumstances to define him. Instead, he built a life around a very different idea. Where you come from does not have to determine where you end up. Today, we're talking about something so much deeper than success. We're talking about what addiction does to a family, what it's like to love someone who you can't seem to save, where someone really has to want help before we can intervene, and what Justin learned from losing his mother and rebuilding his own life. Justin, thank you so much for being here, and perhaps more importantly, being willing to have an open and honest conversation about your journey. And I'm very grateful that you're here.
Mark, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you having these conversations because they are important, right? And over the 10 years of me doing podcasts, whether I be a guest on a show or sharing on my own podcast, what I realized, and many people have reached out to me, they're like, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And so having these open conversations are saving lives. And so thank you so much for spearheading that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our mission statement, and we have it on the front page of our website, is we save families. And I think that's what it's all about. And I think one of the things that people don't realize when we discuss these issues is it's a family disease, right? It's what causes the family to really implode. So I appreciate you being here. So you've told me that you are in Pennsylvania and I'm in Florida. So what are you doing in Pennsylvania?
It's a good question. I actually grew up in South Jersey on the beach. And I ended up moving to Pennsylvania where I am now when I was 19 years old. I'll be 42 in 10 days. When I first moved here, it was actually because my mom was living here and she had a hard time keeping jobs at the time. And so when I was 19, I moved up here and I was supposed to be here for 6 months just to kind of get her settled. 6 months later, she moved back to New Jersey and I stayed. And so here I am, living in Berks County, Pennsylvania for the last 20 plus years. And it's truly become home for sure. But we are having the conversation once the kids are out of high school, where are we going to go? And I'm petitioning for Florida. My wife isn't feeling Florida. So we'll see where we end up.
Okay. So you're a married guy. How old are your children?
So I have two stepkids. They're 15, about to be 16 and 13. So a boy and girl.
And I have two stepchildren too. They're 27 and 29 and I'm almost 60. So I don't know if you were like me, but I had a learning curve. I had to learn to be a stepdad.
Yeah, it is the hardest job you'll ever face. And I'm not a biological parent to any children, but it seems to be a totally different thing to be a step parent versus a biological parent. And I'm still on that learning curve. So I've been with my wife for 7 years. We've been married for a little over 3. And we navigate it as it all comes.
So that's crazy. I met my wife in 2017, but we've only been married 2.5 years. So I'm a little bit behind you, but is there a dad in the picture?
Yes. So, he lives in Indiana. So it's, the kids don't see him all that often, but he's still in the picture. Yeah.
Okay. And what's your relationship like with him? Do you have a relationship with him at all?
Nope.
Okay.
Very passive.
Yeah. Their dad's in the picture. And I promised him that I would always support his role as dad. And so I try to fill in the blanks and just support because for me, at least, I don't think it helps to have an adversarial relationship with the biological dad. It doesn't help. It just does not. It's not the environment I want to be in, and it is what it is. But I'm enjoying learning to be a father, and so it's good. I understand where you're coming from. So good for you. It's not as I told their dad when I had lunch with them one day. I said, you have to understand something. It's not easy to learn to love somebody else's children, especially another
Mm.
man's children, right? And that's what we've had to do, right? And I love them like they're my own, and so all good. All right, let's back up a second. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have two older sisters, so I'm the youngest of three.
Okay. And your dad, is he still in the picture?
He is. He is. So my whole entire family is still in New Jersey, and we have a strong relationship. I would say that I saw them way more often before I had a wife because I traveled as one, right? I thought I was going to be the forever bachelor until I met my wife, and I was like,
Yeah.
I guess I'm not going to be the forever bachelor. And so, yeah, love my siblings, love my dad, and we support each other the best we can.
Yeah, listen, I got married for the first time at 34. I was divorced a year later. And when I met my wife in 17, because she obviously had been married for about a dozen years, I said, look, I'm just telling you right now, if you're looking to get married again, it ain't going to be to me. Okay, I'm a confirmed bachelor. And I put her through the ringer in any way possible. And ultimately, when I said, okay, I'm ready to do this, it's the single best decision I've ever made. I will tell you
Yeah,
that.
I'm super fortunate. I met my wife on Bumble, and neither of us were looking for anything serious. She lived 45 minutes away. She had kids. That wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. Glad I am now. But it was like supposed to be just a fun thing. On our first date, she literally said to me, "Oh, by the way, we met in April. Our first date was on April 1st, and it's also our wedding date. So I only have to remember one date, and it's easy because it's April Fool's Day." And on our first date, she's like, "Just so you know, I'm moving to Seattle in August." Spoiler alert, she didn't move to Seattle. And so, it's been fascinating. And it's one of those things that I tell everybody who's single and they're trying to navigate relationships. I go, look, go in with zero expectations, be 100% authentically yourself. And, it's to the point of like, I see, especially men, right? We try and be the prince to the princess in the beginning. And we do everything. We're opening doors, we're buying flowers, we're doing all this stuff. And all of a sudden that stops 6 months later. And the woman goes, what the heck happened to the flowers and the doors? And I say the key is be yourself right from the beginning, because that's the person they're going to want to be with, give or take, right? Depending on if that's the type of person. And the greatest example is this. I drove down 45 minutes for our first date. And I went to where we were supposed to meet, and it was closed for a private event. And so I texted her, since it was her town, and I was like, hey, it's closed for a private event. Where do you want to go? And she's like, I don't know. Any place on that strip is fine. Like, just pick a place. I'll meet you there. And I told her the place, and I'm sitting there at the bar waiting for her. And she texts me and she goes, where are you? And I'm like the only person in the bar. And I'm like, I'm sitting at the bar. Where are you? And she's like, I'm staring at the bar. You're not sitting at the bar. And I was like, oh, and I took a picture of the beer list that was on the wall and I sent it to her. And she goes, that's Root Down. That's on the other side of town. And so, me not looking for anything serious, I did the gentlemanly thing and I said, well, I already ordered a beer, so just come here. Which is very much me. I'm a very practical person. That makes more sense, right? And so she's like, fine, I have a babysitter. I'm going out tonight. And she walked down to the other side of the strip, and we had our first date. And it obviously, now here we are married, and it's been a wild ride. But she's the best partner. She's insanely supportive. I wouldn't have been able to build what I've built without her. She's just phenomenal.
Yeah. As my late father once told me, having the right partner is essential for success. Having the wrong partner, that can be a problem.
Yeah.
In any event, let's switch gears. Before we talk about your success, I want to talk about your mum. Tell me about your mum. I know she's gone, and I'm sorry about that. It's really tough to lose a parent. Tell me about your mum. What was it like growing up?
Yeah, so my mom was the greatest mom anybody could have ever asked for. She had her own issues, but she loved unconditionally. And people ask me all the time, how did you end up living the life that you live, growing up in the environment that you did? And honestly, it's because of the love my mom gave me. And moments later in life where it was much more difficult, where the addiction was more prevalent, but she was an incredibly loving person. She's the reason I do what I do, because any crazy idea that I had, she'd be like, oh, you got this. I'm so excited for you. If anybody can do it, you can do it, right? That super supportive parent. And it's life-changing. And I remember a moment before I had launched the podcast, I had 3 failed businesses in my 20s. And I was like, clearly I'm doing something wrong. And the original idea behind the podcast was I wanted to interview entrepreneurs so I could figure out how to be a better entrepreneur. I never knew down the road I'd become a podcaster and people listen all over the world and this crazy thing. But there was a moment, I remember my first failed business, and I called my mom and I said, hey, we're shutting the doors. We're out of money. There's nothing else we can do. And her response was the greatest response ever. And it was a mom being a mom in the moment, but I often think about it. When I gave the eulogy at her funeral, I ended the eulogy with this. And she looked at me, we were talking on the phone, and she said to me, Justin, you're headed in the right direction. Just keep your head up and keep moving forward. And I realized that as we reflect back on that comment, it's so true, right? As long as you're headed in the right direction, you'll get to where you're going. It might not be the path that you thought it was going to be. It might not be the trajectory you thought it was going to be, but it was the greatest words of wisdom I could have heard from her. And what ended up happening was, but it was 6 months before I launched the podcast, my mom lost her battle to opioids. And what ended up happening was the conversations I ended up having were more about how do you overcome adversity? How do you come back from a rock bottom moment? How do you love yourself? And I think because in that moment, I needed that conversation and the authenticity of those conversations in that moment, that's why the podcast took off. And so it's very, very odd to look back and realize the worst moment in my life was when my mom passed away. But that's what led to the greatness that I've created in my life. And so it's a very odd dichotomy. And I had a lot of internal struggle with it for a long time, but I've had a lot of subtle nods knowing that I'm doing the right thing by having these conversations.
Yeah, it's so ironic. You never realize the words of wisdom your parents pass on to you. My father's been gone almost 10 years now, and he was not an educated man. I mean, he left school at 14 and my mother 16. And he was a streetwise guy. He was an entrepreneur. Some things worked, some things didn't. Some made money, and some he lost his you-know-what on. But he gave me so many words of wisdom, and I didn't realize it until he was gone. So your mum really just hit the proverbial nail on the head. So she was obviously a wise woman. But let's talk about a second. What was when you talk about opioids, what are we talking about here, Justin?
It was oxys. That's where it started, at least. So when I was 12 years old, I remember coming home from school, and my dad was at the house, which he normally wouldn't have been. He would have been working, and my aunts and uncles were there. And I was like, what is going on? And what ended up happening was, at the time, my mom was working in a pharmacy. And so she was stealing the pills from the pharmacy, and she ended up getting arrested doing that. And that was the awakening of like, oh, we've got an issue here. And I remember being a teenager in Alateen and going through those meetings while she was in AA and doing all those types of things. But that was really the start of it. And what's interesting, there's a television series, like a short run series, and I can't remember the name. It might be Dope Sick is the name of it, I believe. And that's literally my mom. Like, the main character was, hey, this started out as a prescription because she had neck pain, and that led to the addiction. And then what happened from there, right? And she was your proverbial Dr. Hopper, getting everything she could. I mean, they were giving her 90 pills at a time. Like, it's a crazy epidemic in this country. And, when people ask me about, like, what are your thoughts on it? I go, honestly, like, a company that can pay billions and billions of dollars because they got sued for an addictive drug and they're still selling the drug and they're still in business, that's the biggest problem. And so my mom was literally she was patient zero. We didn't realize what it was at the time. We now know 20 years later how much of an issue that is in our country. But she was patient zero. It was the very beginning of that drug.
So was there anything else? It was just the oxys, or did that lead to anything, the oxys?
So we only know that it was the oxys. And what's interesting is she didn't actually die from an overdose. She died because her stomach ended up rupturing from taking all these pills over the years. And it's a fascinating thing because at any given time, I mean, what we found out later, she was taking 30 to 40 pills a day at times. And it's just crazy what happens. And so we don't know if it ever went into any other drugs that we're aware of. She was getting the pills till the day she died. I think she got a prescription filled the day before.
How long did this go on for?
20 years, on and off. And the off times were great. And I remember it was probably 6 months before she passed. She was clean. And it was an interesting thing because I was like, whoa, I got my mom back. It was like the old school conversations that we used to have. And it wasn't from a struggle bus standpoint. And obviously she fell back into it at the end because she got another prescription and went from there. But it's fascinating because you have those ups and downs throughout the time of that happening. And I remember when I moved to Pennsylvania, I was living with her. I was sleeping on the couch of her 1-bedroom apartment. And I remember walking in one time from my job, and she was sitting on the couch. And I was like, what are you doing? And she yelled at me because I scared the cat. We didn't have a cat. There were moments of her seeing things that weren't really there, but then other times of total clarity. And so it was quite the roller coaster over 20 years that just perpetually got worse over the 20 years.
Was she ever able to acknowledge that she had a problem?
Yeah, I mean, we had multiple conversations. There were a couple trips to rehab. Speaking of cats, a couple trips to rehab and all that stuff. It was an interesting kind of journey to navigate that. But my mom is somebody, and this is, I had a realization a couple months after she passed away. So what ended up happening was, after she passed away, I went on a 3-month bender where I was blackout drunk 6 nights a week. And I knew what I was doing. I was very self-aware. I knew that I was numbing pain. I was avoiding the emotion. And I had a coach at the time. And my coach called me one day and she goes, "What are you doing tonight?" And I go, "I'm going out with some buddies." And she's like, "No, you're not. You're going to sit and you're going to feel this shit." And that evening, I did an exercise where I wrote a letter to her and did all this stuff and felt the emotion. It was a terrible evening. I just cried all night and allowed myself to feel the grief. But the next day, I woke up with such clarity, and I had two realizations. The first realization was my mom didn't die because she was an addict. My mom died because she didn't love herself. And the second piece was I didn't love myself either. And that was really the beginning journey for me to kind of discover what is that self-love? What is all those things that I need to find happiness in my life? And so that's the interesting part. My mom would acknowledge it, but if she never figured out that the reason was she didn't love herself, well, that's the healing that she needed to do, and she didn't realize that, right? You have to find the pain point that leads to the addiction. And unfortunately, that especially back then, that wasn't always what the conversation they had. I think more and more they're having those conversations, but back then that wasn't the conversation. It was follow the 12-step program and you'll be fine. And that's not the case if you don't heal the wound that's there.
That often is the battle, is getting somebody. From our perspective, we're obviously using the legal system to put people into treatment. And one of the things I see is the sort of this pattern of in and out, right? I call it the honeymoon phase. You get somebody into treatment, they're there for 7 to 10 days, and the minute they have to do that first therapy session where they really have to confront what's going on, they're out of there. And that's the biggest problem. Was your mom, did you ever have a conversation with your mom about going into treatment of some kind other than 12 steps?
No. And honestly, at the time, I didn't see myself as the person to do that. There were other people in my family who had those conversations, her sister, her brother, my aunt, uncle, stuff like that. But I was my external family, so aunts, uncles, and my extended family, they did a really good job at keeping us out of those conversations. And then at the end, she was actually living with my sister for the last couple of years of her life. And so my sister was taking care of all that stuff. And so regrettably so, as we look back at 2020 vision, rear view vision, I wish I did, but I didn't. I do remember one moment where I was at my sister's house when she was living there, and we were out on the back deck and she was slurring her words. And it was the first time I had seen that addiction kind of come back in quite some time. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And I remember having not the right way. And I regret it now. And I think about it from time to time, but it was like a shouting, like, "Why do you do this? Like, what are you doing? Why do you do this? Why can't you get help?" And she was literally crying and she's like, "I don't know." She's like, "I don't know. I don't have the answers." And that's really the only confrontational conversation I had with her about, you need to get help. And it just obviously didn't stick.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was on TikTok last night. I posted about this. I post a lot about this stuff. I think it's important to talk about it. And somebody had said that he'd been drinking for 30 years plus, and he did not agree with the analysis or the conclusion that it's a disease of the mind. What are your thoughts on that? You don't have to agree with me. I'm wondering what you think, because you had that really heart to heart with your mom, and you're asking why she can't stop, and she doesn't know, and she obviously didn't. So, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a conscious choice? Can we stop? I mean, I know there are some people that can. Not in my world. That's not the kind of call I get. We're dealing with people who just simply cannot. What do you think about that?
I don't know if it's necessarily a disease of the mind. I think that it's something to numb the pain of whatever pain they're going through in their life, right? And it's easier to get the dopamine hit of an addiction, whatever that addiction is, anything from drugs to alcohol to porn, whatever you're addicted to, sex, it's easier to numb that pain than to address the issue. Now, the way that drugs and alcohol affect the brain certainly lead to issues beyond just what is that original pain point, but it has to start somewhere. There are plenty of people who drink that don't have a drinking problem. There are plenty of people who can go on oxy for a pain and then never stick to it, right? There's always more to what's going on there. And I'm certainly no doctor. I'm just somebody who lived through it in so many, shapes and forms, and have been to meetings and heard about it. And so my answer is I don't really know. But I do know that you have to address the issue that, okay, well, why are you numbing this? And can you heal that? I know people who were addicts who got clean and then now are healthy. They can socially drink, and it's not an issue because they dealt with the pain that was there. And so that's the fascinating thing that I don't quite understand. And when you look at what my mom was addicted to, those pills are the most addictive pills in the world. It's the most addictive thing in the world. And so that rewires your brain in many ways.
It was interesting. I've had 3 surgeries in the last 2 years to fix my elbows. I just tore the triceps. The first 2 times I had surgery on my left arm, The doctor who knew what I did, he prescribed me oxys. I said, Doc, come on, you know what I do. You know I'm not going to take these. He said, well, you'll be in pain. I said, I'll take a couple of Tylenol. It's fine. And two surgeries and two prescriptions for the same medications. The third time I had the surgery, I had another doctor do it. He's like, I'm not prescribing you oxys. So it's just amazing, right? That we know about what these things can do, and yet we're still prescribing them. It's just mind blowing. With all that was going on with your mom, how did it affect your family? Obviously, your dad, your sisters. How did it affect everybody?
Yeah, I think from a positive perspective, me and my siblings are very close to this day because we went through all of that together. Those types of things led to divorce. It led to the separation of family, and really kind of it made it more difficult to navigate. And I think for me, like when I think about my younger years, right, from the ages of 12 when it started to the age of 18 when I was still just graduating high school, it was really like, okay, I know that my life is different. And it was a lot of like, why can't I have the normal life like all these other kids? Why can't I, live in that kind of sense? And so I don't know. The thing is, I don't know anything different. Right. And so, like, how did it affect my family? I mean, we were just a family, we were built a little bit different. Right. Because I didn't experience any other life. And so, I don't know if it negatively affected it because at 19 years old, I had to move to Pennsylvania to help my mom pay bills, right? That shouldn't be put on the shoulders of a 19-year-old. But at the same time, like I look at everything, like I have the thought process of like, okay, why is this happening for me instead of to me? I don't have a victim mindset when it comes to anything that I've been through. And there's always the positive. Like there's so much positive that came out of the things that I've gone through. Yes, a massive negative of losing my mom when I was 31 years old. But at the same time, that idea of, okay, what kind of positive spin can I put onto this, right? And I've helped hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people through my podcast, people who have listened over the years, and what a blessing that is. And so I don't know if it necessarily negatively affected the dynamic because it's all we had. It's all I knew. I don't know what it would have looked like if my mom didn't have that addiction.
Okay, let's talk about your dad. Tell me about him. What was he like? What is he like?
Yeah, my dad was tough when he was younger. So this is fascinating. My mom was the empathetic parent. My dad was the tough, hey, why don't get your shit together, right? Like he was your typical dad. He was an entrepreneur. Later in life, he started a construction business and got into all that stuff. But he's super supportive, and he's somebody who now he tells me he's proud of me more than anybody else in this world now, which is pretty cool because he was the tough parent. But the fun fact about that is my dad later in life came out as gay. And so, that was a whole nother perspective flip of like, okay, now we've got a whole new dynamic that we have to deal with. But me and my dad have a good adult relationship where we get to talk about the hard stuff now. And it's fascinating. I'm just honored and glad that I still have a parent that I get to have those conversations with.
Okay, I think that's very open-minded about you. I have two gay cousins, and their personal life, I never really even thought about it because they're my cousins and I love them. So that's it. Just I love them. That's it. I never really thought about it, but I've always known that. So I think that's an interesting perspective from a parent, and that tells me a lot about that you come from a place of love because you've accepted that. I think that's amazing.
I'll say this. I mean, he came out when I was 16 years old, and I had the moment of like, hold on, this is who I'm supposed to learn how to be a man from. And now this, because it was a different time. I meet more people now with gay parents than I ever thought that I would meet. I thought I was alone on that island for a very long time, but it's very common. I'm just grateful that my dad grew up in a time where he couldn't be openly gay because then I wouldn't be here. And so, he doesn't look at it that way. He wished he could have lived his whole life in that sense, but I wouldn't have been here if he grew up in this era because it is just an accepted thing. But yeah, he's still my dad, and it's great. And it's an interesting perspective now, but yeah, I don't judge in any way, shape, or form.
I love it. Talk to me about the Growth Now movement. What's that all about? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is obviously that's the podcast I started 10 years ago that, 2 years in, I got put on a list on Inc. magazine, top 8 podcasts every entrepreneur should follow, changed my life overnight. 370,000 people read that article. And talk about that's the boom of podcasting. When I started my podcast, I'd be like, oh, I've got a podcast. And people will go, what's a podcast? Like that's how different it was 10 years ago. Because now they roll their eyes and go, oh God, you have one too? Because everybody and their mom has a podcast at this point. And so I started it again. The original idea behind it was I wanted to interview entrepreneurs, pick their brain, figure out how to be a better entrepreneur so I can go build a business that didn't fail. And what ended up happening was when my mom passed away, my entire life shifted and conversation shifted. And honestly, it's called the Growth Now movement because I didn't like the name of Growth Now podcast. And so I was like, let me choose a word that might make sense. And I threw the word movement in. And obviously, it did start a movement. Fast forward, I now do live events called the Growth Now Summit Live, based around my podcast as a self-development event. And the funny thing is, I didn't realize until last year's event when I walked out onto the stage and I looked out into the theater and I realized half the theater were people that have been on my podcast as a guest before, people who have spoken on my stage in previous years. And I was like, and I looked out and I go, stand up if you've ever been on my podcast. And when half the theater stood up, I realized, oh, that's the movement. It's the movement of people connecting who want to help other people, who want to show up and support, who want to pour into others and help them reach that next level. And so that's really the movement. And it's evolved into, now I'm doing a second event in January in Orlando called Growth Now Elevate, which is a high ticket event, bringing people together to network, to create relationships, to do all those types of things. And so it's really, really cool to see that the word that I randomly chose in the ether of movement has really become such a movement of incredible human beings who are operating at such a high level, who just want to give first. And what a blessing that is. And it became a vehicle that has led to multiple businesses, some I've exited, and just great opportunities to be able to speak on stages and do some really cool things.
What other businesses have you built, Justin?
So the first thing, like any other podcaster 10 years ago, I started a podcast production company where we'd handle the back end for podcasters and all the editing and all that stuff. And we ended up leaving that business a number of years ago. I also still own a company now in the podcast space because I believe in this medium. It's called Pod Brand. We help podcasters create their brand, and then we also help them create social media content and support them going forward on the back end. And so I always... The funny thing is, when I exited podcast production, I was like, I'm done in the podcast space. And then I got pulled back in, and Pod Brand is the thing, right? And because look, this medium changed my life. And so how can I help this medium change other people's lives in so many ways, shapes, and forms? And so that's where Pod Brand came from. I also run a mastermind for entrepreneurs, which is a business that I run. So right now, currently, I guess 3 different businesses between the mastermind, Pod Brand, and then my live events that I'm running right now. But yeah, and some other opportunities that, we were in the podcast guesting space for a while, exited that. And so, yeah, it's always been in the podcast space. I guess that's my expertise in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, so those are the different businesses that I've done over the last 10 years.
All right. So I want to switch gears for a second, because when I read that you had a 1.7 GPA and were the least likely to succeed, you were voted the least likely to succeed, I was like, that sounds about me, because there was a time when I have friends that, I grew up in England. I've been here since '87. I've met some, I've stayed in touch with some of my friends. They couldn't believe I became a lawyer. I was the kid who was probably least likely to succeed. So I want to know something. How did a kid with a 1.7 GPA become so successful? Tell me about that, because that is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, life experience. I think everything that I chose to do gave me an opportunity to kind of be curious about what other opportunities are out there. When I was 18 years old, I got a job in direct sales and did really well. And that was my original taste of like, I can create my own income and I can create my own schedule and I can do all these things. And, being really smart with the mentors and the people that I surround myself with. My keynote that I give are the 5 people you need in your life. It's the book I'm currently writing. And I realized, when I was 19, I heard that quote from Jim Rohn: "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
I was listening to Jim Rohn this morning in the gym. He's amazing,
I love it.
isn't he?
He's incredible. What's funny is I was like, okay, at 19, I got to get rid of all my loser friends, go find 5 millionaires, because when you're 19, all you want is money, and go hang out with 5 millionaires. And very quickly, I was like, that's dumb. Why would 5 millionaires want to hang out with me? And so I swept that quote under the rug. And fast forward, once I started to create some success, I went back and I visited it, and I go, well, who were those 5 people? And obviously they changed over time, but I realized there were always 5 people that filled 5 specific roles in my life, which led to my success. And so the 5, I'll go over the 5 roles. The first one is your cheerleader. That's the person that when you get off the phone with them, you feel like you can run through a brick wall, right? They hype you up. They think that they see the potential in you before you see the potential in yourself. Like that very important cheerleader role. The second one is the bruiser. This is the person who's willing to question you on the direction you're taking. Somebody who's willing to push your buttons. Somebody who's willing to really kind of help push your limits in a tough way. The third person is the softie. And so actually my softie is my wife, thank goodness. I'm her bruiser, which is it's an interesting dichotomy. But this is the person who, when things aren't going right, They're willing to listen to you. They're willing to let you cry. But then the most important piece is they help brush you off and pick you back up. Very, very important piece, because there are many people who find a softie who allow them to stay in that rock bottom moment, and it's not the right person, right? Misery loves company. The fourth person is a mentor. I believe, I look at mentor a little bit differently. Like, I look at a mentor as somebody who has something innate inside of them that you want more inside of you. So currently my mentor is a guy named Fabio Viviani. He was on the show Top Chef. He owns restaurants all over the world. Very successful chef. And he's somebody who gives so much, and he doesn't have to. He doesn't need anything in return. And so for me, I want to be the biggest giver in the world. How can I give? How can I pour into other people without expectation? And he does it at such a level that I want to get there. The fifth person is a coach. I believe at any given time, you should be financially invested in your future. That could be a coach in your business. That could be a coach in your wellness, in your relationships, in your spirituality. I've had coaches in all of them, but I believe you should be financially invested in your future. Now, if you're somebody who, I don't have the funds right now to be financially invested in your future. Well, when I was 22 years old, I didn't either. But I found ways to give to coaches in order for them to kind of pour back into me. So it might not be a financial exchange if you don't have the finances, but once you do, you should be financially invested in your future. And I realized that those 5 people are the reason throughout the last 20 years of this journey of how I've been able to create the success. I've surrounded myself with the right people. I've gotten into rooms where people are lifting me up, helping me navigate the next step. I'm trying to figure this out just like everybody else. And I look at it from a standpoint of like, me 5 years ago is a completely different version of me now. And so 5 years from now, it's going to be a completely different version then, because I continue to learn. I continue to engage. I've had some of the biggest names on my podcast. I've been able to pick their brains for an hour plus of how they've been able to build their life. And so I utilize that, and then I put it into action. And I think that's the biggest piece. There are a lot of people who consume. They consume books and podcasts and YouTube videos, and it's all rah, rah and exciting. And they go, I've learned everything. I know how to build this out in AI, and I know how to do this, and I know how to do a funnel, and I know how to do all these things. Great. Well, why aren't you doing it? And that was the piece, right? Like I was a self-development junkie. Like I would consume nonstop. And I was like, why isn't my life changing? It's because I didn't put it into action. And so it got a lot easier once I identified those 5 people. I was like, cool, like I can utilize these 5 people in order to put all these actions into place. And I think that's the key. I think a lot of people, who go through hard times don't think they're deserving of being in the rooms with certain people. They don't think they deserve the time and the energy and the space that's given. And I just showed up and I said, how can I be of service? And it is paid back tenfold, right? And I think for me, a big shift, I always used to walk in those rooms and try to be the most interesting person, but it was a facade, right? I was just trying to figure it out, and everybody sees through that. And when I shifted from trying to be the most interesting person to being the most interested person, that's when everything shifted. If I walk into a room and I want to know more about you than you want to know about me, and I want to find out how I can support you, life changes, relationships get better. Your businesses get better. Everything gets better in your life. And I think that was really the key. It's never, look at some of the smartest people in the world, or the most successful people in the world, definitely weren't the smartest in school, right? And so that's not the key to success. The key to success is how can you put together the pieces for yourself? And the blueprint looks a little bit different for every single person. I don't think there's a secret weapon or a secret shot or whatever, right? And so I think that was the piece for me, is the relationships that I've built.
Yeah, God, that's so fascinating. So, I'll be 60 in January. I don't think I really got my act together until about 13 years ago. And the way this happened is I ended up meeting somebody. I got invited to a breakfast meeting. There was a guy there who was speaking, and he had founded a company that teaches lawyers the one thing they don't teach any law student anywhere in the country, and that is the business side of practicing law. And that really resonated with me. And at the time, I was flat broke. I had nothing going on. I just moved back from California, flunked the California bar 3 times. And after I heard him speak, I begged him for a job. I ended up getting hired, but here's what I didn't know when I went to work from Justin. His company is a personal growth company for lawyers.
Wow.
And I spent a year learning about the practice of law from a business perspective, but I also spent a year working on myself. And that completely changed the direction of my life. And I learned a couple of things. Number one, the reason I'd been miserable and I was broke was because I'd failed to take 100% responsibility for my decisions, both personally and professionally. And 2, if you want to really be happy, you got to build a business where you feel like you're helping people. And that had been the missing piece of me for a very long time. And once I figured that shit out, I was able to sit down in the local library in February 16 while I was tapped, and I opened up my law firm. And It's taken me 11 years to get where I am now. But God, the stuff you're saying is so true. You got to find a purpose in life, and it's got to be something different from making money. Because if you do something good, you'll make money anyway, right? And
Hmm.
so their philosophy is personal growth has to precede financial growth, and that was the key. And so I really appreciate what you're saying. But it sounds like part of your mission, and you talked about the summit, and I'm going to want to talk about that with you in a minute. Is there's a personal growth component to this? Is that some of it is about? I mean, you talk about a mastermind. I went through a mastermind with my mentor. That was an interesting experience when I got to confront some of my demons.
It's fascinating, right? So much that I've sat down with neuroscientists and some of the people that really break into like, why are we the way that we are? And the biggest thing that I saw across the board is that 97% of our programming happens before the age of 7. So everything that we're carrying, all the demons that we have as adults, the reason you're not creating the success that you want to create was wired in you before the age of 7. And so what happens is I have a dear friend, his name is Nick Santanastasso. If you don't know him, look him up. Born with no legs and one arm, one of the biggest keynote speakers in the world. And he said he came in and spoke to my mastermind as a guest mentor. And he did this exercise where he's like, look, he's like, what's the one thing in your business that you're not doing right now that you know that you should be doing that'll move the needle? And I was like, well, probably posting more on social media, right? And he goes, great. So why aren't you posting on social media? Oh, well, I'm afraid of judgment. I'm afraid of this. Okay, well, why is the 12-year-old boy in you still afraid of judgment, right? And we have to really dive into our story and why we're not showing up the way we're supposed to be showing up. And like you said, the personal development exceeds the financial development or the business development because you have to become the person that deserves those things. I had a relationship coach at one point, and this is before I met my wife. And if I never had this relationship coach, I wouldn't have been able to keep my wife because she is an absolute 10 in all areas of life. And I'm certainly not. And she had me do this
We share
exercise.
that in common too.
Yeah, no, right? Exactly. We're two lucky guys. And she had me do this exercise where I wrote a list of everything I want in a woman, about her personality, how she's going to show up for me, what she looks like, what's all the things, right? And I wrote this list. And she goes, great, read the list to me. And I read it to her. And she goes, now, are you the man that deserves that woman? And I was like, nope. So I had to become the man who deserved that woman before I got that woman and kept her, right? And so that's the personal development before the payoff. And if you're not doing the work inside, you're not going to get that external result. And a lot of people miss that. Now, obviously, there are always people that they'll find a way, right? They'll grind and they'll do all these things. And then we get into talking about things like grit versus all these other things. But it's a fascinating thing. And I think for me, like, I'm always looking to improve myself, which allows me to in turn help other people do the same thing. I'm certainly not perfect. Those demons still come up. The negative self-talk still happens. I've just developed tools in order to quiet it faster and be able to move forward. And so, yeah, like I love what you said about you have to build a business that you feel like you're helping people. It makes it a lot easier to show up every single day. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, you talk about the negative stuff. Do you have days? Do you still have days where the alarm goes off and you just don't feel like getting out of bed and going to work? Do you get that?
Yeah. And I only work 2 to 4 hours a day. And so there are still days where I wake up and I'm like, oh, here we go. Right. And it's all part of it. Right. Entrepreneurship's interesting. Entrepreneurship's the only thing where you can make almost no money in 1 month. And then somehow one of the days in the next month, you made more than you made the entire year. Right. Like it's a grind. You got to keep showing up. And so what I do, I have 4 non-negotiables every single day, but one of them is a visualization practice where I take 5 to 10 minutes every single day and I visualize what I want to build. And it could be a specific thing. It could be a visualization of like, hey, I'm going to go on Mark's podcast today. How do I want to show up? How do I want to envision that conversation? Or it could be big picture. Where do I want to be when I'm 65 years old? What house am I sitting at? Is there water nearby? What's it smell like? What's it feel like? Are my loved ones with me? And you get clear on that picture. And the more clear you are on that big picture, it's a lot easier to get up and check those things off the list that you don't necessarily want to do. And, one thing we talk about in my mastermind all the time is like, I ask the question, what's the one thing you've been putting off for so long that if you just did it, it would take you 5 minutes, right? A lot of the times it's way worse in our head. And sometimes that's the morning dialogue. Oh, I got to do this and I got to do that. And then you just go do it. And you're like, it took me 5 minutes and it wasn't painful at all. Right. But for sure, man, it's a constant work in progress. I'm not a morning person, never have been. Fun little story about morning routines and waking up early and doing all these things. Do you know about the Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod?
No, what's that about?
So he wrote a book years ago. This guy named Hal Elrod. He's got a huge following now. The book, it's the number one, it's the top selling, hold on, it's the most sold self-published book of all time. And he talks about you wake up in the morning and you do all these things, everything from like journaling to reading to exercise to all this stuff, right? And so Hal Elrod sold Cutco knives when I sold Cutco knives. And he was like the big dog, right? He was the best sales rep in the country. And my boss said, hey, Hal's doing a call tonight. I want you to get on. And this is back in the day when we didn't have Zoom. Like we would dial into a number and press a code and a pound button and do all that stuff. So I'm on this call, and Hal starts the call with, I'm going to tell you what I do every morning that sets myself up for success. And I'm more successful now than I've ever been. And he goes, I wake up at 4:00 in the morning, and I hung up the phone. I was 19 years old, and it was the first ever time Hal talked about the Miracle Morning before the book was ever written. And I hung up on the call because he said, I wake up at 4 a.m. I believe in like, it doesn't matter what time you wake up. What matters is like, what are you doing in the time that you're awake? And so, yes, I have that negative talk sometimes in the morning for sure. I want to stay in bed longer, especially on dreary days. We don't have the Florida weather here.
So when you were building your business, did you ever have days where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore? Did you ever feel like giving up, but you kept going anyway?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Especially in the beginning when I was just like, I'm trying, like every month it was like, am I paying rent or am I paying the electricity? What bill is getting paid this month? Right. And those are the days where it was like, I could have went back, and I was in medical device sales, not medical drug sales. And I did really, really well. And I was like, I could easily go back and do that. But my dear friend Naveed has a t-shirt that says unemployable. And I feel like that's me. I would be like, oh yeah, be comfortable, go get a job, get a paycheck. But then I'd either get fired or I'd quit within 3 to 6 months, like guaranteed. And so, yeah, there's definitely those moments. There were those moments before of like, why am I doing this? Like, what's the purpose of all this? But once you start to create a little success and you get to create your own schedules, it gets a lot easier to be like, okay, I'll get through the grind, because the grind still happens. I mean, my business got turned upside down in 2020, like so many others, right? When COVID hit. And there was actually a moment, because 75% of my income at the time was speaking and my live events, all gone. And I went to my then girlfriend, now wife, and we were living together at the time. And I was like, I think I got to get a job. Like, I don't think I can build a new type of business. Like, I don't want to go through all that again. And she looked at me and she's like, babe, we've got this. And that's how you know you have a rock star partner. She's like, babe, we've got this. And I was like, all right. And I hired a coach, still a dear friend to me to this day. And we get on a Zoom call when I was trying to figure out who I was going to hire. And he goes, what do you want to do? What do you want to make money doing? I go, honestly, I just want to get paid to be me. And he was the first person who didn't laugh at me. And I was like, you're hired. And we've been able to build out a business where I now work 2 to 4 hours a day. I'm making more money than I've ever made before. And I get to the incredible work-life balance. And I get to spend time with my wife and go to lunch with her during the day and all that fun stuff. And I get to go to my stepson's track meets and my stepdaughter's track meets every time. And it's what a blessing that I've been able to build. But that started with me going, I can't do this again. And so, yeah, those moments are important.
So what did you do? Did you move everything online? How did you adapt?
Yeah, so I did the one thing I never wanted to do, which is I built an online course, which they were still popular at the time. They're not as popular anymore, but built an online course on how to start a podcast and build out a podcast. And in the next 6 months, I think I made $80,000 off of that alone. And then did a couple of virtual events where we made really good money. And then shifted into I had a community before I had the mastermind, which was a lower ticket, like entry level thing, which was all online. So yeah, shifted a lot of the stuff online and made it as passive as possible. Like, how much time is this going to take me? Because I don't want to be working nonstop anymore. I did that already, and then COVID stripped all that work away from me. How do I build something that's not going to take a ton of my time, and created a lot of that passive income?
Wow. So do you have a team? Have you invested in technology? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I have a team in India that works for me, and that's mainly with Pod Brand, creating the social media content for podcasters and all that stuff. Otherwise, it's really just me. Now, when I host an event, I obviously hire an event planner and all that stuff where I don't have to worry about all the weeds and stuff like that. But yeah, so other than that, it's just me. I really believe in keeping things as simple as possible. Something that happened in that direct sales job is they would always say SIBKISS, see it big, keep it simple, stupid. And so I think people overcomplicate things. You know, you'd ask me if I had a website, and I go, I don't have a website just for me or anything that I sell, because in 2022, I realized that my brain was constantly occupied with, why is my ClickFunnels not working? Why do they keep stopping at the second step instead of buying from me? What's going on? I was like, screw this. I'm getting rid of all of my websites, and I'm literally just leveraging, relationship capital. And I ended up hosting a retreat in 2022. that I sold out solely with one Instagram story. And I realized like, oh, I was overcomplicating everything. Like, why can't we just make this super simple? And so everything I build out is very simple yet effective. And I don't need 10,000 steps because I think a lot of all that stuff was created because somebody said, oh, I see a market here where I can confuse people and make money off of them in the process. Why not just simplify it? My good friend Liz Wilcox, who is a genius email marketing person, she has a $9 a month subscription that makes her $500,000 a year. And she calls herself, this is her phrasing, not mine. She calls herself a two-step bitch. And I sign up to that all day long. How can I make this as simple as possible? Get rid of the red tape. And that's what I did in 2022. And so, yeah, it's all about keeping it simple and building big and dreaming big and seeing where it takes you.
That is impressive. Okay. Tell me, what does the future look like for you? Can you share some of your goals and dreams and aspirations?
Yeah, for me, it's about deeper connection, better relationships, and supporting people as best I can. Everything I build is for other people. Like people say to me all the time, like first time I ever did my summit, I didn't even give a keynote. I just had other speakers because it wasn't about me. I want people to look at what I've built and go, oh, if that schmuck can do it, I can do it too. And what a blessing that is, right? And so how can I bring people together? And so I'm introducing a new event in January. I mentioned it earlier. It's called Growth Now Elevate. So I look at the Growth Now Summit as like the why, right? Like that's the crazy stories of people overcoming and inspiring and doing all those types of things. And I call the summit a day-long rock concert for entrepreneurs and forward thinkers. Growth Now Elevate is a more intimate 30 to 50 people max event, all operating at a high level. It's a higher ticket event. And it's really about bringing people together and seeing what happens from there. We'll have a lot of networking involved with it, less speakers, surprise speakers, actually. So what I'm doing, it's a little bit different. Is you don't know who the speakers are until I call them up on the stage. So they'll just be there with us, hanging out, being a part of the entire event. And then once I call them up on stage, you'll be able to learn the how from them. And so they're some of the smartest people with what they teach that I'm bringing in for this event. But the most important part is, can you get value out of any room you walk into, right? So like, hey, I'm going to sign up for this event. I'm paying, tickets start at $2,000. So I'm paying $2,000 to go to this 2-day event. Do I trust myself enough that I'm going to get value out of any room that I walk into? And it's going to be a fascinating experiment to see what happens and to see what kind of magic comes from that room, because you'll remember 10% of what you hear from a stage if you go to an event, but you're going to remember how you felt and you're going to remember the connections that you made. And so I'm curating an incredible room of people that are going to lift each other up, and who knows what kind of magic that's going to create for the world. And so that's the next specific big thing that we're working on. Pretty excited about that. We've already sold 7 of the tickets and we're moving forward to hopefully sell out at 30 people. And just a fascinating time to be able to bring humans together and create connection.
Wow. Okay, for the folks that are going to watch this, how do they find out more about you, the summit, all of that?
Yeah, so if they're interested in coming to the summit, we do have a website for that because it's a lower ticket event. It's growthnowsummit.com. They can check it out. We've just announced the first speaker last week, more speakers to be announced soon. So they can go there. The best place, honestly, is to hit me up, follow me on Instagram at Justin T. Schenck, send me a message. Would love to hear from people. Like I just got a message the other day from somebody who heard me on another podcast. And she's like, thank you so much for being you. I loved the episode and I want to come to your event in January. So if you want to come to Elevate, there's no landing page for it. It's an invite only event. So if you're interested, we can hop on a call and see if it's a fit for you. But yeah, so that's the easiest way. So growthnowsummit.com or Instagram.
I love it. I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. And for the folks that are watching, thank you for tuning in. If you want to learn more about what we do, mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. That's mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. Or just go to YouTube and Google me. Or I guess do a search for me on YouTube and you'll find about 1,200 videos all about the work that we do. And thanks for tuning into this episode. Until the next one, take care.